I've seen Rick fight the devil, clone himself out of death, and indirectly turned everyone into Cronenbergs because Morty wanted Jessica to fall for him. But somehow, none of that compares to what went down when Rick finally caught up to the one person he could never outsmart, himself. This war was personal, and depending on how you look at it, Rick might have won, or completely lost the plot. There's a lot more here than meets the eye, so let's figure out the truth. Who is the strongest Rick after all? To get to that, we have to talk about the one who started it all. For most of their lives, Rick Prime outplayed, outmaneuvered, and outsmarted Rick C-137 at nearly every turn. He killed Diane and Beth. He forced Rick to abandon his own reality. He planted a scar so deep it rewired Rick's entire identity. So if the final blow came from C-137, fine. But every hit before that came from Prime. And it wouldn't have happened without evil Morty. That's the truth Rick doesn't say out loud. Because for most of his life, Rick was chasing. And Prime was always ahead. It started with a refusal. In Rick Mirai Jack, Rick Prime offers C-137 the secrets of multiversal travel, and C-137 says no. So Prime ended up killing Diane and Beth. That one move fractured Rick's timeline and his identity throughout the series. It's the reason he completed the portal gun, the reason he slaughters other Ricks, and the reason he becomes the man he is. And Prime didn't hide during any of it because he was never scared. He just doesn't care. While Rick burns his way through timelines, Prime lets the fire spread. He watches from the edges, builds traps, tests weapons, perfects the Omega device, a kill switch that can erase someone from every timeline at once, the kind of thing you build when you're not afraid of consequences. But by the time of the Unmortrican episode, Rick finally catches up, and it still wasn't enough. Prime kills Slow Mobius without blinking. He shrugs off Rick's tech, outpaces him in close combat, and mocks him mid-fight. Even when evil Morty disables Prime's healing system and wipes his backups, Prime wasn't exactly bothered by it. Although, he did die because of it, but he still taunted Rick and told him that the second he started chasing, he had already lost. And maybe he did, because this was reflection. Prime was never Rick's opposite. He was Rick without excuses. And even though he's gone, the version he left behind is still haunted. Because the smartest Rick in the multiverse was built by grief. A lot of people think Rick C-137 was the smartest because he made the portal gun, but he only completed it after watching his wife and daughter die. That matters. Rick Prime invented multiversal travel, but Rick C-137 invented it in spite of himself, out of grief and obsession. He reverse-engineered dimensional science by following the ghost of a man he hated and became that man by accident because he couldn't stop. The show never gives us a full play-by-play of how it all happened, but the key moments are scattered across episodes. A young, devastated Rick turned down portal tech in Rick Mirai Jack. A flashback to a bomb dropping into his garage in The Rickshank Rickdemption. An entire multiverse slaughtered in the hunt for one man. Rick C-137 didn't chase power. He chased closure. And when he couldn't get it, he helped build the Citadel instead. This is what makes him different from Rick Prime. Rick Prime had direction, purpose. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he didn't hesitate, but C-137 did and kept looking for answers. And when he didn't get them, he nuked the board. He slaughtered every alternate version of himself who might have had the same face because he was desperately trying to control his grief. But here's the part people overlook. He actually succeeded. He built the central finite curve, a firewall that locked Rick into every dominant position across the multiverse. He turned chaos into architecture, then left it behind. So that's right, Rick had no plans of ruling the Citadel. He rejected it, left the Ricks to play pretend government while he spiraled alone. And when the Galactic Federation caught him, he didn't beg. He let himself get arrested, then hijacked a simulation inside a simulation, faked his own brainwashing, escaped prison using a fake backstory, and destroyed the Citadel from inside a cell. In The Rickshank Rickdemption, he initially presented a fabricated memory to his interrogator, claiming it was his origin story, while secretly implanting a virus into the mind-reading device. This virus allowed him to hijack the agent's body, teleport the Citadel into the same space as the prison, cause the Citadel to be destroyed and help him escape. That's what makes him dangerous. Rick C-137 builds weapons, that's for sure, but he makes plans that span years for the most part, plans that tear institutions down while everyone else is still reading the rules. But none of it brought his family back, and that's the crack running through everything. Rick C-137 is strong because he refused to break, but also because he already did. He burned the world trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed, and the more he lost, the more dangerous he became. Curiosity was never really a driver for Rick. Damage took the reins. That's why he keeps coming back stronger, more paranoid, less attached. He's trying to make the pain mean something. That's exactly what Rick Prime wanted. And if you like to know about the strongest characters in Rick and Morty, hit that subscribe button. We've only scratched the surface. Because for a guy who built the Citadel and the central finite curve, it's easy to forget how often the supposed strongest Rick has fumbled. Rick had already lost long before he built the Citadel, or helped create the central finite curve. The curve was all about control. A firewall to cut off any universe where a Rick wasn't on top. In theory, it made Rick the smartest man in every room, but in practice, it just built a cage. One where Prime didn't need to hide, because he was never trapped inside it. Rick thought the curve would keep him one step ahead, but Prime had already thought of all this, so that murder was strategy. Prime didn't want Rick dead. He wanted him obsessed, and it worked. Rick Prime dropped a bomb through the portal, and the most dangerous Rick in existence was born. That event forced C-137 to abandon his dimension. We see it most clearly in Rick Potion number 9, when Rick and Morty Cronenberg their entire world and skip out, as if it's nothing new, but it is. Because that moment was part of a pattern and a survival instinct born out of past trauma, the kind of trauma Rick Prime planted in him. This is the aftermath of being permanently replaced by someone more prepared, smarter, and colder. Rick Prime was always 3 steps ahead. C-137 tried to track him across timelines and built a database of every Rick he encountered to catch him. He developed weapons, body mods, and even emotional buffers to stay focused, but it didn't really matter. In Rick Mirai Jack, Rick Prime set the rules of the game as he made the first move, and every move after that is a reaction. C-137 becomes a genius because of trauma, builds the portal gun because of grief, constructs the Citadel because he can't kill the man who made him, which is really just programming. In Solarix, we finally see just how untouchable Rick Prime has become. When all portal travelers are reset, Rick and Morty land in the Cronenberg dimension, Prime's home turf. They infiltrate his lair expecting a trap, but instead, Rick Prime is casually in that glass tube, smiling because he was baiting them to begin with. And after emerging, he kills Jerry Prime in cold blood, even acknowledging Jerry's ruthlessness, and shrugs it off like it's no big deal. Meanwhile, Rick C-137 is still chasing shadows, wasting decades and weapons on a man who isn't even playing the same game anymore. By the time they actually face off in Unmortricken, it was already too late. Prime wipes out slow Mobius across timelines with a smile. He dodges C-137's punches mid-monologue. He uses Rick's own attachments against him. He's always ahead, physically, emotionally, strategically. Even after Evil Morty disables Prime Rick's healing protocols and erases the backups, Rick Prime just laughs because he knows what Rick won't admit. He already won by turning Rick into him. He was right when he says,
Admit it, you would have been me.
Who's outsmarting who? Because if you're counting wins, Prime had the lead, until someone rewrote the game. Subscribe if you're into the kind of character breakdowns where the smartest guy in the room gets played. Rick didn't evolve into a better man. Rick didn't win. He just lived long enough to become the man Prime needed him to be. But the one thing Prime didn't plan for was Morty, because Rick might have pulled the trigger. But he never would have had the shot without Evil Morty. Let's call it what it was. Rick Prime didn't lose to C-137. He lost to a 2-man ambush, and one of those men wasn't even on his side. From the moment they entered the fight in Unmortricken, it was clear that Rick was angry, and it consumed him since he had been out for revenge for all this time. Morty was just there to clean up a loose end. And that difference in mindset is exactly what turned the tide. It was Evil Morty who came prepared. He hijacked the Omega device, he planted the neural bomb. He knew about Rick Prime's failsafes, the backups, the healing protocols, and the regeneration suite. And he took them off the board one by one with planning. The one thing C-137 used to pride himself on, before grief turned his intelligence into desperation. When the fighting started, Rick Prime dominated and stabbed C-137. He was seconds away from dying again, chasing the same man who's haunted his entire life. And even when Morty intervened, Rick still almost blew the whole thing because he was too emotional to land the kill. It was Evil Morty who stabilized the play, who reminded Rick, this isn't about winning, it's about ending it. And even then, Rick needed backup, needed Morty's data, needed Morty's detachment, because without him, Rick never would have made it to the fight in the first place. For all his reputation as the smartest man in the multiverse, Rick couldn't beat the one person who broke him. Not without help, not without someone colder, smarter, and more objective standing by. And that someone wasn't another Rick, drum roll please, it was a Morty. It's poetic in a way. Rick spent years trying to prove he didn't need anyone, and when the moment came to end his greatest enemy, the only reason he won is because someone else carried the weight he couldn't. That was a handout or a baton passed from the broken version of Rick to the one person who truly outgrew him. And that leaves one final question. If Rick couldn't win alone, what does that say about who's really in control? Rick thought he was the main character, but in the end, he was just another piece on someone else's board. That's the part he'll never admit. Rick Prime wasn't alone in outsmarting him, Evil Morty did that too. Because while Rick was searching for closure, Morty was playing the longer, logical game that didn't revolve around pain or family or revenge. Let's go back to Rick Mirai Jack. Evil Morty didn't sabotage the Citadel because he was angry. He did it because the system was broken. Because Ricks kept building cages to lock themselves in and called it freedom. C-137 was the worst offender. He hated the Citadel, but he still used it. Hated being part of the curve, but still enforced it. Hated being Rick, but couldn't stop being one. But Evil Morty saw through all of it. That's why he left. But that's also why he came back to end the cycle. And while Rick was spiraling, while he was drinking and grieving and rebooting his clones, Evil Morty was building the tools to win. And when Rick needed him most, he offered strategy. That's the difference. Morty was in total control, which is something we should have expected from Rick. And Rick Prime saw it too. That's why he mocked Rick even as he was dying, because he knew the truth. Rick didn't win. He was used. A blunt instrument in a plan bigger than his own vengeance. And when the job was done, Morty walked away untouched. So who was in control? Not Rick Prime because he lost the moment he underestimated Evil Morty. Not Rick C-137 because he lost the moment he needed help. It was Evil Morty, the guy who played both sides and left the battlefield without a scratch. Rick thought he had the upper hand. Turns out, he was just a pawn in someone else's plan. If you're into breakdowns that flip the genius myth on its head, subscribe and stick around because this begs the question. If Rick Prime was the strongest and Rick C-137 was the survivor, does that make Evil Morty the real winner? The price of winning Rick Prime is dead. Evil Morty is gone. So that just leaves Rick. After everything, the wars, the betrayals, the clones, the decades-long revenge arc, Rick C-137 finally did it. He beat the man who ruined his life, the Rick who killed Diane and Beth, the one who turned him into a monster. He won, and it changed nothing. In Unmortricken, after the final blow lands and Rick Prime's body hits the floor, there's no big speech, and Rick doesn't even gloat, celebrate, or look proud, because somewhere deep down, he knows this wasn't a real victory. He's exactly who Prime said he'd become. All that time hunting, all that pain, all that hatred, it didn't make him better. It made him the same. He built the central finite curve to stay on top, built fail-safes in his bones, cloned himself into near invincibility. But none of that stopped him from losing the only war that mattered, the one against himself. And now that it's over, he doesn't know who he is anymore. Rick Prime had purpose. Evil Morty had vision. Rick C-137 has survival. But survival without purpose is a dead end. He's the last Rick standing, sure, but he's standing in a crater. That's the price of winning. You don't walk away stronger, you just walk away. And maybe that's why this fight mattered, because it exposed the truth every Rick tries to ignore. Being the smartest man in the universe doesn't mean a thing if you've got no real purpose left in life. Rick Prime is gone, but the scars he left on C-137 will run deeper than any wound. Rick won, but he walked away hollow, because being the strongest, Rick doesn't mean beating your enemy. It means surviving yourself. Was Rick Prime the better Rick after all? Or does surviving make C-137 the strongest? Subscribe if you enjoy the content, and we will see you in the next video.